I believe that Muse's 2009 release The Resistance marks a significant departure from their previous efforts, but just not in a good way. The release was the band's 5th album and brought with it something brand new for the band. They produced it themselves. The band were riding high, coming off a tour that had gone from strength to strength, seeing the release of massive hits such as Supermassive Black Hole, Starlight and Nights of Sidonia. The tour spanned just over 2 years, seeing the band play in stadiums such as Wembley for 2 nights, which later went on to their Harp Live album. As well as multiple arena, stadium and festival shows, the tour was an undoubted success for the band, leaving them finishing on a high. As well as all the tour dates, the band also found a new fan base in the form of Twilight after having Supermassive Black Hole included in the soundtrack, later having 2 more songs of theirs included in further such releases. Writing began in late 2008, seeing such themes and influences such as 1984, a common influence for the band. It also saw influence with the then going on London riots and protests, which is why it's so popular in France. As well as these, it would also see other such influences in the form of the MP scandal and an old CIA program. In terms of instrumentation, it was pretty much business as usual for the band: guitar, drums, bass, synth and orchestra, though this time round it was much more bombastic, particularly with Exogenesis. So my issue with this album being potentially the weakest of Muse's releases comes down solely to its production. But what is the role of a producer in the context of an album? It can be quite difficult to outline what the role of a producer is in an album, as it can pretty much change from production to production. Despite the confusion of what the role is, it is undoubtedly a critical part in the creative process. They can lay down a bass line, keyboard parts, program drums, they can even take phone calls, and mediate disputes between band members, just to name a few things of what they do. They also are responsible for setting and managing the budget for the entire production. Anyone at all can recognise how important that would be. It should be quite obvious that studio time gets quite expensive. Arguably, one of the most critical parts of the role is to capture what the band are playing and make it as good as possible. They often have a difficult task ahead of them, one by ensuring that the music is both enjoyable and also a success. So they have to ensure the integrity and the intent of the band, but also ensure that it's a commercial success, reaching a broad audience. With each project a producer takes on, they have a difficult task ahead of them, taking what the music the band are playing, ensuring it's enjoyable, but also a hit. They have to ensure the integrity and the interest of the band whilst also making the music a commercial success by reaching as broad an audience as possible. And the production of The Resistance was the most drastically different production experience they'd had on an album ever. Up to the production of The Resistance, they'd worked with other such producers as John Leckie, who'd helped them produce Showbiz, Origin of Symmetry and Hullabaloo. Paul Reeve, who'd worked on Showbiz and Absolution. David Bottrell, who'd worked on Origin of Symmetry. Rich Costey, who'd worked on Absolution and Black Holes and Revelations. And finally John Cornfield, who'd worked with them on Absolution and Hullabaloo. So just on face value, it's worth noting that they'd worked with all of these 5 individuals across all of their albums up to this moment, utilising their skills and expertise to really drill down into what each of their albums was trying to say. And so this time they were entering the studio on their own. You'd think that having done 4 albums previously with a range of individuals that they would know by now a thing or two about how to produce an album. Consider the number of artists that Rich Costey has worked with up till now. All of them have their own sound, style and audiences, all of which come together to make their own individual identities. Now going back to what we've considered as the role of the producer, which is to get the best out of the band possible. Were Muse the suitable people to take on that role at that time? Keeping in mind it does require the ability to listen to a song and know how to get the best out of it and to capture that sound, put it onto a record and make it interesting, fun and a commercial success for its audience. And I can't help but think that they'd just come off a massive tour, massively successful, no real negative things to say about it. It had gone from strength to strength. Looking at the beginning of their tour, the early shows, they were quite small relative for the size of them. And then they end on a massive high, doing loads of festivals, loads of stadium shows, and releasing a live album from Wembley. It's not exactly a humbling experience. My perception of what a producer should be is to retain objectivity over the project, the song, the instrumentation, literally every aspect. To my mind, the role of a producer is to be able to sit down, listen to a song, and know what it's trying to do, what it's trying to say, to get the best out of it. Listening to the song to see where it's supposed to go, not trying to hit a predetermined outcome. And it is, in my view, that Muse were not being objective during the production of The Resistance. More specifically, I don't think Matt was being that objective during the production of The Resistance. It was the first time they were taking on this role. Yes, they had a sound engineer with them, and they did have years of experience up to that point. But were they really well prepared? It's very difficult to say what was going on in the room when they were making it. Their experiences up to this point would have been subject to a producer. They were the ones being told how to play something, what needed to change. The producers they'd worked with before may not have explained how their processes worked. They may have just sped through and just told them how to perform something in the interest of saving time. If that's the case, Muse had very little experience of which to draw on for this. Now that is entirely speculation, so let's not focus on that possible scenario. Let's just take a step back and see them change from being the client to the provider. They'd seen the success of their previous albums going from strength to strength. Origin was a massive departure from Showbiz. Absolution was pushing the boundaries of what they could do. And Black Holes and Revelations had really cemented them as one of the best live acts around at that time. So where do they go from there? In their previous albums, no matter how different the genres got, the overall feel still stays the same. With The Resistance, to me at least, that's a bit more complicated. Let's look at it from the track listing point of view. The jump from Uprising to Resistance isn't that jarring, although The Resistance does have an overall larger feel to it. It goes from a traditional guitar, drums, bass, maybe a bit of piano, to a very much more electronic feel. Now, that's not new for Muse either, they've done it before. Then jumping from Undisclosed Desires to United States of Eurasia is another massive change. It's a big gear shift. Yes, that helps with establishing a great dynamic range and so on, but the feel between those two songs is not that much. The transition from United States of Eurasia to Guiding Light is a lot softer, there's a lot more connective tissue there. It's very similar in terms of its overall feel, but then jumping over into Unnatural Selection really changes up again. And that's still a very similar song in terms of its setup. Guitar, drums, bass is there, but there's this time a lot more energy going on. The overall production feels different. Then shifting over to MK Ultra, where things all get turned up to 11. Now this is where Muse are really comfortable, I feel. The overall feel for MK Ultra is very consistently Muse. It's got some elements of where they've worked before, but then a direction where they want to then leap to. A lot of the sounds and a lot of the feel from MK Ultra, I believe, can really be felt across all of the album of Drones, whether you like it or not. And then for perhaps the biggest downshift in all of their discography, from MK Ultra to I Belong to You. A massive song as MK Ultra, all brought down to a piano-based love song with a weird French cover in it. A massive shift, the production changes all over the place, and it's quite jarring. Now, you could argue that the jarring nature of it is quite good. It's trying to say something, it's trying to communicate lots of complex things. But United States of Eurasia into I Belong to You might work a bit better. That's just a thought that I have. You can only look at Exogenesis really as the 3 songs, but as a separate movement. It's a shame that Exogenesis Part 2 never got played live. They never got played all together. Part 3 only got played once, I believe. Part 1 was the one that got played. It was the one that Muse decided was going to be the best way of articulating what they were trying to do. I don't understand why they weren't brave enough to do all 3. Certainly they were very playable. Now, I like what Exogenesis tried to do. It's an interesting concept to tack on to the rest of an album with a more traditional individual song basis. This was very much their first stab, I would believe, into what they tried to do with later albums, particularly Drones, with having one consistent theme or one consistent feel to then run through an entire album. But this time they were trying it with just 3 songs. Now, the production of Exogenesis, I believe, was really well done. There was careful thought to what the strings are doing and careful thought to what the rest of the band were doing. It sounded massive, the guitars know exactly what they're trying to do. Dom is an excellent drummer and knows exactly what needs to be done in terms of how to get that performance out of him. I don't know if Matt was telling him to do one thing or another, but Exogenesis, everything really came together really well. But comparing those 3 songs in that specific feel that they were going for is quite a bit of a disconnect from the rest of the album. It would kind of really make much more sense to me if Exogenesis was kind of its own release. Let's say they wrote 3 different songs to just tack on to the rest of the Resistance in that kind of one feel. How that would sound, I don't know. But if they then put Exogenesis as its own release, as its own significant landmark, that might have had a better production for them. That might have had a better release for them. That might have been a better commercial success for them. I don't know. Because the Resistance has 2 mindsets to it, essentially. What the first 8 songs are trying to do, and then Exogenesis. Taking a step back from Exogenesis and then looking at the production as a whole, and I'm going to focus on the guitars for this. To my mind, Matt ditched largely all of his big sounds and just went for a Vox AC30, which is a guitar amp. Now, it's a very famous guitar amp. Brian May used 9 of them for his live performances. The Edge is a big fan of a Vox AC30. It's a well-used and well-loved amp, and I can guarantee that you've heard it on a lot of albums that you've listened to, whether you know it or not. But one AC30 on its own, in one room with a couple of mics on it, doth not make the Muse big sound. The biggest culprit of a poor guitar production, to my mind, on the album is in the opening track. It's in Uprising, and it's the riff, part of the big chanty part of the song. The performance of it, it sounds like it should be massive. You can imagine this in a Muse live situation where it's, you know, thousands of people around you, all chanting in unison, but it just sounds like a flat Vox AC30 and not a very good sounding AC30. It's a brilliant amp, and it's got a lot of bite and a lot of punch to it. It's a classic British sound, but it sounds flat, and the guitar choice is a bit odd as well. It sounds like a Strat. If you're not a guitarist, it's quite a dull, well-rounded sound, good for rhythm guitar or noodling up the upper end of the neck, not for a big riff. Now, we've seen in the making of the Resistance that Matt went through a bunch of guitars for that sound, but I want to know what possessed him to use that particular sound. Now, it might be that he had one amp and one sound for that riff, and then for the solo-y, the picky, noodly part was a different sound. That's quite common to see in production. But I want to know why he chose that. Why not the other way round, or why not just that big sound for the whole thing? I'd been playing guitar for a little bit at that point in 2009, maybe 3 or 4 years. And it sounded okay, it didn't particularly stand out as something terrible or something really good. It didn't make a major impact on me, which in and of itself could be a bad thing. You want that kind of to really stand out. This is your big rally the troops type sound. And Muse can do big guitar sounds. But what the difference is with this album is that they produced it themselves. Maybe they wanted to do something completely different. Maybe they didn't know how to mic up a guitar amp that well. That doesn't make sense, because then looking at what they did for MK Ultra, they can do a big guitar sound, so why did they go for this route? What were they trying to communicate? It doesn't sound as big as it really could be or what it should be. The sound itself is quite small in kind of scale, so they wanted a big rallying cry, but to only a few people. It doesn't make sense to me, and that is a key critical production failure to my mind. What they were trying to communicate and what they came out with was really different. And it kind of follows that kind of feel for almost the entire album. Nothing really gets that much bigger. Matt Bellamy is a great guitarist. Muse have known for having that big sound. Maybe some bits here and there on the album stand out guitar-wise. Maybe the solo for Guiding Light stands out. A little bit of the riff for Unnatural Selection kind of goes in that territory, but it doesn't have the iconic killer sound that they'd had on previous albums. The guitar tone for Supermassive Black Hole is iconic. So is the sound for Stockholm Syndrome. Pretty much the entirety of Nights of Sidonia, Newborn. All these songs have iconic and great sounding guitar sounds to them. I can only really comment on the guitar because I'm a guitarist, not a drummer, not a bassist. Though the drums and bass sound fine, but they don't stand out. Maybe they do for Guiding Light in terms of the drums, but at the beginning, all you can hear is drums. It's so weird to me that the production for this album goes in the direction it does and is quite confused as the album goes along. The standout being MK Ultra. Oh, that's fallen there. MK Ultra, production-wise, sound-wise, compositionally, is so different from the rest of the album. It feels deliberate, it feels thought out, it feels precise, it feels like it really knows what it's trying to do. It's very, very aware of itself. And it's got that big sound to go with it. It's got great dynamic range. And I don't understand why there's a difference between the first bunch of songs up to that point. It feels like they're two entirely different productions. And then it falls away again for I Belong to You with a kind of a sterile feel to it. And then Exogenesis takes over. So I may have said previously that there are two sides to the Resistance, but considering what MK Ultra is doing within that body of work, it really feels like a three-sided story. Going back to what we've said and what I've covered about what I believe, at least, to be the role of a producer, to be objective, to hear what the songs are trying to say, and make it all sound like one thing. They can all do different things, but they've got to come back to one central feel. I think the Resistance fails at this because it's doing so much. Now, individually, these songs are fine. They explore something interesting. They're doing something new for Muse. I'm all for finding new things to talk about or sing about or write about or whatever. That's what music is all about. It's all about expression. But really it's best to communicate, to my mind at least, one kind of central thing at a time. If you want to try something else, something new, save it for the next release. Have that one consistent, solid message. And I believe that Muse picked up on that. They may not have communicated it, but they picked up on that and then improved it for subsequent releases. Since the Resistance, they've been involved in the production side of every album. They may have worked alongside other people here and there, but they have continued to self-produce. The Second Law, they did continue to self-produce, but it had a better and tighter narrative overall. The idea of the second law of thermodynamics, the conservation of energy, the loss of energy, the economy, all those have central themes, both in the lyrically in the writing, but also as the production was much more consistent. I think that they'd really learned from their mistakes from the Resistance, if you can call them mistakes. But then they were brave enough to then work with other people. Mutt Lange for Drones was a real standout, and they'd really done something very different from the Resistance and the Second Law with Drones. Like I said, I think MK Ultra was kind of like the blueprint, the kind of the test bed for what Drones was trying to do in terms of its lyrical content, the themes, the production itself. There's a lot of connective tissue between MK Ultra and Drones. Then shifting over to Simulation Theory, they self-produced it again, but this time with a bunch of other people. Now, you could argue, especially with the case of Simulation Theory, that it was an issue of too many cooks. I mean, as well as the band for the album, there were 4 other producers. Now, they won't have produced the exact same songs every time, but with the idea that of what a producer is supposed to be, have that consistency for the album, having 4 other producers as well as the band makes for a non-consistent feel, and may have contributed for the lackluster fan appreciation of the Simulation Theory. Who is to say? Moving forward, after Simulation Theory, Muse then self-produced Will of the People, and to my mind it kind of suffered again, different kind of feels all over the place, but the drastic kind of nature of it wasn't so bad. They managed to pull it all together relatively okay, I think. There's still some things here and there, but it was a much tighter album compared to the Resistance, much tighter than the Second Law. I think this was a combination of all the things that they'd really learned, a much better go at self-producing an album and having a much better go at it. I believe that Will of the People was a much better attempt at self-producing an album for the band, as they'd learned quite a lot over the years. This was over 10 years since the removal of the Resistance. They'd really learned how to produce an album after the mistakes that they'd made. Now, this is not me saying that Muse made mistakes and therefore they're bad. I am one of the biggest believers of the best time for you to learn anything is by failure. Great, if you win at something, great, but you aren't really going to learn anything from it. You're not going to learn how to improve. You just know what you needed to do in that moment to achieve that thing. Failure is a great learning tool, and I believe with the Resistance, they may have seen it as a failure in terms of a production side, but it definitely wasn't a commercial failure. It's one of their best known albums. A lot of people I've spoken to or kind of just see online, what have you, within the Muse community, regard the Resistance as one of their favourite albums. It was very much the entry point into their appreciation of Muse. So from that side, from a production side, from a commercial sense, it wasn't a failure. It was brand new territory for the band, and they definitely gave it their best go. What I'm trying to say with this video, which has now just turned into a stream of consciousness, is that the album, to my mind, might not sound the best, but I'm biased. I have my own preconceptions of what a Muse album should sound like and what I like a guitar to sound like. I've been playing for a long time, since I was a kid, and I've then gone to study at university music production, music technology, and I kind of know what needs to be done to make a guitar sound big, and I've stuck with it since then. I apply the things that I've learned in the cover videos that I make. I like to think that I know how to make a good and big guitar sound. Now that might not be to my taste in terms of what they did with the Resistance, but I have to applaud them for making that effort in the first place. They did really well. It was very brave of them. They might have just come off of that previous tour on a high and been really cocky. There may be an element of that, but they experimented. Muse have always been that experiment-led band, and I hope that they continue to do that for as long as they have a career. I said in my previous video that I think there is a strong possibility that Muse move to a more of an EP type setup. But that might then break down into a one EP does a certain type of music, the heavy stuff, and then the second EP does the lighter stuff. That might make their releases more commercially appealing for those particular audiences. It might give them a better space for communicating those things in a more tight and condensed way. Thinking back to what I thought about Exogenesis, if that was released as an EP today, I think it would do quite well for them because it's a very consistent sound and it moves in a real interesting way, and the music does change up, but it has that central theme. With the way that the music industry is at the moment, there is a lot of disjointedness between releases, and bands really do try and struggle to keep a consistent image, I think, or try to stay relevant. And I think Muse would do really well with this. They've got the reputation behind them to put a release out and still have people know about it. The release of Unraveling came out of nowhere, but people latched on really quickly. They've demonstrated that their audience is there willing to listen. And everyone knows that they experiment and they do crazy things and they like to change things up. But a tighter release might serve them better. That's just my view. But it all comes down to everyone's own view. And I'd love to know what you thought about this down in the comments below. Do let me know if you agree with me, if you think that Resistance is, or at least represents, their worst album, or if you think that I'm talking absolute rubbish and you think it's their best album they've ever made. I genuinely would like to know what you think about it down in the comments below. Let me know what you thought about the video overall, what you'd like me to cover in a video next like this. I'm enjoying this format for the most part. It's a bit stressful to think about what I want to cover. I definitely don't mean to bring these sorts of topics up as a point of just shitposting or just kind of just saying horrible things. I do want to have a conversation about Muse in the community and what people think about it. But yeah, we'll leave it there. So hopefully you join me for the next video. Hopefully it's something like this. They're quite fun to make. Anyway, take care. I've been Harry, and thanks for watching.